Hey, it's Nikki, and today I am talking about how tours are an easy vehicle for education and why, because of that, just giving facts is no longer enough. The use of tours for education is not something we should take lightly as tour guides. And while I know I talk a lot about how we should make an effort to reveal a more diverse history on our tours, we should also take care with the more common knowledge history as well. While travel has an incredible capacity for opening up people's perspectives, it isn't a guarantee that that will happen. And the person who has the most influence really is the tour guide. So taking on that responsibility of educating through our tours means making any history accessible so that it sticks. Giving fact after fact is great and it's impressive, but if the guests retain zero of those facts after they get home, what was the point? Right? So in this article, I'm going to lift three simple techniques for making the history of your tours more accessible and more memorable. So, number one, lean into universal themes. My favorite tour guide guru, who I talk about often, Sam H. Ham, states that one of the best ways to increase the relevance of interpretation is to incorporate something he calls a universal concept. So, these are connections to ideas that tend to be relevant to everyone and always have. For example, conflict, embarrassment, freedom, hope, power, strength. We all know these feelings and concepts. If your tour requires you to touch upon seemingly irrelevant historical characters from way back in the day, see if you can get away from dates and instead share stories of loss, triumph, betrayal, love. These are going to be more relevant to your guests. Number two, draw comparisons. History repeats itself often. And by pointing out when it's repeating, you can help guests make the connection between something that seems far in the past and something that's a hot topic today. So, for example, there are many tours in New York City, in Los Angeles, Miami, that talk about U.S. immigration history. People enjoy hearing the stories of their ancestors, but it's always very glorified. Like these were the good ones who came over and they worked really hard to make a new life in the new world. But to really make the connection to modern times, a guide on one of those tours could point out that new immigrants come to the U.S. every day with the same big dreams. You don't need to go farther into it than that, but you're simply planting that small seed of connection that can make what seems like an archaic moment in history very current. And bonus points if you can make modern day comparisons to your guests' home country or culture. The more relevant it is to their daily lives, the more likely they are to connect with and remember the content. And yes, I know this brings into the tricky area of politics, which guides have very strong feelings about, but I will link to an article I wrote about politics on tours if you want to know more about how you can safely incorporate politics. Okay, and finally, number three, replace dates with more relevant numbers. This is a trick I learned from the amazing team at Krakow Urban Tours. They give phenomenal tours in Krakow, and it's one of those super simple but super impactful switches. People don't remember dates. Sorry, academic guides, they just don't. It's not something they retain. And yet, obviously, dates are important to put things into context or perspective. So the next time you really have to give a date, try this trick my friends in Krakow use instead. So you can replace the date with another historical event. So for example, the Sistine Chapel was finished right around the same time that the Spanish began their conquest of Aztec civilization, right? So you're equating two major events in history and you're placing them on the same timeline, which isn't often done. Or you can connect the date with a personal timeline of your own or a timeline of your guests. So for example, my grandfather would have been the same age I am right now when he shipped off to World War II. Right, so it's put into context. Wow, a person this young, right? As if this person were going. Or for the guests, you could say, so this would have been around the same time when your parents were most likely teenagers, right? So again, without calling out anyone's ages, you're making it relevant into their own personal timeline. So just some tricks you could play around with.